Hi there, Jeff Campbell here from Middle Class Dad over at newmiddleclassdad.com. And in today's Traffic Thoughts video, we're taking a look at the worst child behavioral issues out there and what are some solutions for you and your family. So, what constitutes a child behavioral issue? Well, as parents, we often see these behaviors, and when we see them, we're not sure, is it a passing phase? Is it something they picked up at school? Is it something that's rooted in something that I'm doing? And is it going to go away on its own, or is it going to become a bigger problem? And honestly, we don't know. We're not often sure. So how do we know if something is a passing phase or a more permanent behavioral issue? Honestly, almost any behavioral issue out there can be one or the other. And what determines whether something becomes a permanent condition or it is a passing phase is how we respond to it. And I'll give you an example. So let's say you're out at the store with your child and they see a juice box and they really want that juice box. And you had donuts for breakfast and you're trying to limit their sugar intake. So you say, no, we're not going to get that juice box right now. And then they proceed to have a huge major meltdown. They're throwing a huge temper tantrum right there in the store. As parents, this has happened to almost all of us. We can all relate to this. But how we respond to this is what determines whether this is a passing phase or becomes part of their personality. If you give in because you're embarrassed or ashamed and you say, okay, well, we'll get you the juice box this one time, what you've just done is program your child to know that the way to get what I want is to throw a temper tantrum. You've just ingrained that in their personality. And if you do that a few times, then it's permanently part of who they are. And then it takes a lot of work to undo that. But if you stand firm and you say, you know what? You had donuts earlier this morning. We're not going to have a juice box now. But the next time we come here, if you can behave well, we'll get you that juice box. You've been clear, you've given them the expectation of what you need from them, and now they are in the driver's seat. And obviously, for a 3-year-old, this is going to be a little different than an 7 or 8-year-old. But you've still been clear, you've been consistent, and they know what they need to do. And if you need to, just remove yourselves from the stores. If they're still throwing that temper tantrum, you say, you know what, we're not going to do this here, we're going home. And just be firm, fair, and consistent. That is the best way to parent, absolutely. So how do we know as parents whether a behavioral issue is permanent or a passing phase? And the easiest way to tell that is when you start to see consistent changes in mood, changes in grades, changes in friends at school, or in communication from your child's teachers. When you see consistent changes for the negative in those areas, that's how you know that this is something that needs to be addressed and shouldn't be just put aside. So how do we address these concerns when we have them with our kids? And the easiest thing to do, in my opinion, is to talk to them like an equal. They know you're the parent. They know you're the boss. Just like when I was a leader with Whole Foods Market for many, many years, my employees knew I was the boss. I didn't have to walk around and tell them that. I didn't have to act like the boss. They knew I was the boss. So I talked to everybody like an equal. Sure, sometimes I had to lay down the law just like you will with your child, but I never spoke to them in a way that I didn't want to be spoken to. So that's the first step. The next is just to be completely honest and open and transparent with your kids. Obviously, you'll want to do this in an age-appropriate way, but kids can smell a hypocrite a mile away. You've got to be honest with them. You've got to be open and transparent. You've got to communicate with them clearly and let them know what you see, let them know what you expect, but also be willing to listen to them. Kids really need to feel heard. They really need to feel valued and validated. And listening to them without just waiting your turn to talk is the best way to do that. One other thing I want to mention very quickly is a quote that I absolutely love from Dave Ramsey. Now, when he said it, he was referring to personal finance, which is what he's an expert about. And he wasn't referring to parenting at all, but I actually think this quote applies to all aspects of your life. And the quote is very simple. It is, to be clear is to be kind. And what he was essentially saying is that when we have an uncomfortable topic of conversation that we want to address with somebody, a lot of times we'll get a little passive aggressive, we'll get a little vague, we might cloud our words because we think that we want to be nice to the other person and maybe not be quite so direct. But ultimately, To be clear and simple is to be kind, and anything else is unkind. And so I want to encourage you to talk to your kids this way too. Set clear boundaries, set clear expectations, but be willing to listen to them too. But make sure absolutely certain that they know what is expected of them and what the consequences are if they don't do that. And then just be firm, fair, and consistent. The next thing I want to say is I want to encourage you to let your kids have some say in their life. Kids feel out of control, more out of control than ever before in our history of our planet. And almost every decision facing children is made by somebody else, and many, many kids feel completely out of control in their life. And this feeling of out of control is responsible for a lot of the behavioral issues that we see. So when it makes sense, allow them to make decisions for themselves, even if it's just you giving them 3 choices that you determined were okay and letting them pick which of the 3 they want to do. That still suffices, and it still does the same thing. It allows them to feel in control of their lives. And the more in control of their life they feel, the less acting out you're going to see. The other thing that I notice, both as a parent and as also someone who works with kids and parents in my day job, is that the other thing that I see that really drives a lot of child behavioral issues is an overall lack of involvement from one or both of the parents. And I think there are very few parents out there that intend to not be a good parent. Most of us want to be a good parent. But a lot of times, especially dads, we get busy with work. We think that being the primary breadwinner is the number one thing that we're supposed to do for our families. And so we're a lot less involved, or can be a lot less involved in our kids' lives. The other thing that I see that happens a lot is parents of divorce. I couldn't tell you how many times parents have come to us in my day job wanting to find solutions for child behavioral issues that have cropped up. And they're willing to look at every possible reason except for the elephant in the room, which is the fact that they and their spouse recently divorced. And I can tell you, as the child of divorce, that divorce has a devastating effect on children. And that's not to make anyone feel guilty that's been divorced. I've also been divorced too. But if you and your spouse are divorced, it's crucial that you find ways to move forward from that have the least damaging impact on your kids, and that includes being kind to each other in your communication. It includes not bad-mouthing your spouse to your child, etc. And it also means coming together and finding common ground on how to parent from separate households. If you're not divorced, then I think you need to do everything possible to try and save the marriage. And obviously you can only do your part, but we all play a role in making relationships, and we all play a role in breaking them. So the number one thing that I want to encourage you to do is to take an active role in your kids' lives. Take an active role in being there for them and being honest with them. And if you and your spouse have split up or are splitting up, being honest with them about that, being honest with yourself about that, and the potential impact that's going to have on your child. What are the 7 worst child behavioral issues out there that I've identified? The first is defiance. And these are kids who backtalk. They just absolutely refuse. They throw temper tantrums. They don't want to do what you want them to do. And why do they behave this way? It's because of what I mentioned earlier. They feel completely out of control in their life, and they're trying to assert some semblance of control back into their life. And yes, how they're behaving is inappropriate, but what they're trying to communicate is not. So again, as I said earlier, the easiest way to combat this particular child behavioral issue is to let them have some say in their life when it makes sense. Give them 3 after-school activities and then let them choose which of the 3 they want to do. Let them have some say in their life when appropriate, and you will have almost no issue with defiance. The next issue that you see out there is aggression. And this can be aggression that's directed at you, it can be aggression that's directed at themselves, or it could be aggression that's directed at somebody at school. But aggression is basically telling you that your child is fearful and scared. Something is causing them to feel scared and afraid, and they're acting out aggressively because of it. So you have to get to the root of what that underlying fear is. If you and your spouse are recently divorced, it's likely going to be that. If you are an authoritarian parent where you operate on a command and control style and you yell and you've replaced love with fear to get your child to do what that you want them to do, that's likely the culprit. So once you've identified the issue, be honest with yourself and be honest with your child about it. And then you can work towards fixing it. The next of my 7 worst child behavioral issues is lying. And almost all kids lie. Frankly, a lot of adults lie too. And why do kids lie? They lie because they're afraid of the repercussions of what would happen if they told the truth. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is they are afraid of being honest with you. And they're afraid of being honest with you likely because of how you have responded in the past when they have told the truth about something they've done that was not good. And so if you're an authoritarian parent, then that's clearly going to happen. Because you command and control, you dictate to your child like a drill sergeant instead of loving them proactively. But even if you aren't behaving that way, you've got to look at your own behavior and how you respond and see if there aren't things that you're doing. Maybe you lose your temper quickly. Maybe you are quick to punish before you've even really listened to their side of the story. Something is happening in your behavior that is leading to the child wanting to lie to you because they're afraid of how you'll respond. The next child behavioral issue that you see out there is the disruptive child. And I referenced this in my story earlier about the kid and the juice box. And I feel like I covered it there. But essentially, a child becomes disruptive when they don't get what they want. And when the parent gives in and gives them that anyway and is ultimately programming the child to behave that way to get what they want. And so you've got to just lay down the law firmly, fairly, calmly, and lovingly, but consistently, and not give in when they throw temper tantrums. And then this behavior too should go away. The next thing I want to talk about out there is depression. And this is one of the worst child behavioral issues because of how serious it can become. According to the CDC, upwards of 30% of kids these days have some form of depression, and upwards of 17% have actually considered committing suicide. So this is really, really serious. And what causes kids to feel depressed? Depression is basically when they feel bad about themselves, maybe their appearance, maybe their grades. They just feel like they aren't living up to either their own expectations or your expectations or perhaps the expectations of their peers or teachers. So all of the things that we've discussed thus far can play a role in this. Letting kids have some sort of a say in their life, letting them feel heard and validated, you being honest and open and transparent with them, including admitting when you make a mistake. All of these things will contribute to combating the effects of depression, but also being realistic about grades. And, I didn't get great grades in school. And if my mom had grounded me every time I got a B or shamed me every time I got a C, that could have easily led to depression. So if your child isn't getting the grades that you want, then have an open and honest conversation with them about it. But don't make them feel ashamed. Don't punish them for that. Find a solution together. The next one I want to talk about is bullying, and this too is a very big topic right now and has been for quite some time. And there's 2 different ways this can impact us as parents. One is your child might be accused of being a bully, which is a terrible thing to have to face as a parent. Or your child might be the one being bullied, and that too is awful. So how do we approach these 2 very separate and different things? If your child is being accused of being a bully, ultimately we're talking about a child that's afraid. He's insecure and he's trying to make himself feel better at the expense of someone else. So why is he doing that? And how do we combat that? Well, why he's doing that is because he feels out of control in his life. He feels insecure. If you're an authoritarian parent, maybe you're coming down too hard on them and making them feel ashamed about who they are. And they're desperately wanting to find a way to feel better about themselves, and this is the particular outlet they chose. So if you can get to the root of why they are feeling insecure, then you can help them move past the stage of being a bully. If your child is being bullied, the best things that you can do are to work on their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their feelings of self-worth. Because oftentimes the bully looks for someone they can prey upon that they see as being insecure. And that's not in any way to say that someone who's being bullied is asking for it or doing something that warrants it. But if your child is carrying themselves confidently through the halls of school, they're going to stand a less likely chance of being bullied. The last child behavioral issue I'm going to talk about is fear. And honestly, fear is behind most of these. And fear is really the enemy, and not just with children, but with adults too. We lie, cheat, and steal our way through our lives, really mostly because we're afraid. We fight with our spouse as parents because we're afraid of admitting that we made a mistake. Fear is at the heart of almost all the things that are wrong in our world, and finding ways to work through that fear, identify that fear, and replace it with love is really the key to really almost every possible problem out there, but especially child behavioral issues. Replacing fear with love, rather. So if we can find ways to identify the fear, get to the root of it, and move past it, you'll see almost any child behavioral issue disappear. I want to thank you for being here on my Traffic Thoughts video for the day. These are just videos that I shoot to and from my daily commute to work. They're non-scripted, and they're just off the top of my head, and I thank you for being here. If you like this one, please subscribe to my YouTube channel because it really helps me grow my following, and if it helped you, it just might help someone else. And I've got lots of other videos on here that you can check out, and I'd also like for you to check out the link in the description, which leads to my blog post on this very same subject, which goes a lot further and deeper into the topic. Thanks again.